So now we want to go one step further. Now we established the space between the stimulus and the response, and we were able to observe our thoughts. Now the next step is to understand that we are not our thoughts and that we are not our mind. So now we really want to stop this identification with thought, emotion, and who we think we are, or identification with our mind. And before we do this, we need to have an understanding of how the mind actually works and what the mind is. From our Western understanding, there is some identification or some elucidation of what the mind is, but I would like to introduce the yoga perspective here on what the mind actually is in the three parts. And depending on the school of thought, there are different ways of interpreting the mind, but here I would like to show you one interpretation of the different parts of the mind. And they consist of manas, ahamkara, and buddhi. So the first part is manas. This is basically the thinker, the thinking agent of our mind, and it collects and compares data. So all the sensory input that enters our senses basically is then made sense of by the thinking agent, but it makes a lot of assumptions by using heuristics. Heuristics are basically the best guesses that we have of what a certain thing can actually be. And by doing this, it compromises speed. It compromises accuracy over speed. So basically, speed is more vital than accuracy, and therefore it is used to make us react instantly. For example, we see a very famous example is we see a string of rope on the street. Our thinker will be snake, so we will react immediately. So there is this reason why we have this part of our mind, because it is there to protect us. It is there to instantly make assumptions, but obviously you can also already guess that this might be a problem in different circumstances when there is not a snake. The next part is ahamkara. Ahamkara is basically our ego identification. It is this identification with the sense of self, the thinker of I. I am the agent. I am identified with this feeling of who I am. And this can also lead to a problem when we are completely identified with this physical self, with this identity they're created based on experiences and cultural norms. From a spiritual perspective, this will always keep us stuck in this physical realm and therefore create suffering. The last part is buddhi. Buddhi is basically the intellect or intelligence that we have. It is our way of comprehending and making sense of the world. So in yoga, we try to refine and sharpen and really improve our intellect in such a way that we're able to realize higher consciousness, or purusha, how it is called, the cosmic intelligence, the cosmic self of who we truly are. We can use this and sharpen our intellect in order to create to negate this false identification and then find the real identification with purusha, with our higher self. So these are the three parts of the mind, and when they're not properly understood or not properly used, they can, of course, create suffering. And this improper use and this improper understanding is now what we're trying to change, because especially this ego identification, and so this ahamkara, uses the other parts of the mind, the manas and the buddhi, for its use, so to say. So ahamkara is this identification with us, and it uses our intellect and our thinking agent to its advantage, so to say. And what this creates, it constantly distracts us from the present moment and creates negative emotional states, such as negative self-talk. We wrongly interpret things just so that the ego can survive. And ultimately, the ego has, in a sense, our best interest in mind, but the way it executes this is sometimes not really to our best emotional results. So sometimes the ego just wants to continue living and existing, even though that results in us feeling worse and creating negative self-talk. So the ego is a very tricky kind of part of our mind in that sense, and so we would like to really try to use the ego and not be completely identified with the ego. But first of all, we need to recognize this lower self of us, the ego being the lower self, and then we need to remember our higher self, because this is nothing that we need to relearn, we just need to remember it. It's all inside of us, our higher self. The Purusha, the cosmic self is within us. We just need to re-see it, we need to remember it. And then we can let go of the ego identification. And this is actually what we're trying to do here in this part now, and I would like to continue this with a little quote. It is the nature of the ego to take and the nature of the spirit to share. And this really illustrates really nicely of why the ego can be a problem, because the ego only takes, because the ego is I-centered, whereas our higher self of spirit, it's the nature of sharing, of community, to understanding that I am not different than you and I am connected to you and that we're all connected, and serving your higher purpose is serving my higher purpose. And it's the distinction of there's only so much for everyone towards there's enough, there's abundance for everyone. So basically the ego is everything that comes after the I am. I am this, I am that, I am a student, I am a lawyer, these kind of identifications with things. And it's really concerned with survival, wealth, and success at any cost. It doesn't matter over to which negative disadvantage is for someone else or even for ourselves. It's just concerned with this at any cost. And the ego really labels, it controls, and it judges in order to make sense of the world. There it uses our manas, the thinking agent, to label and to judge things. And the ego always takes its own opinion as its absolute truth. It's my opinion is the absolute valid thing and everything else is bullshit. So this is also part of the ego mind. And it thereby reinforces the sense of separation through identification with things. And eventually it then also uses things like negative self-talk to reinforce its existence through separation. So it's always this idea of separating myself from everything around us, just to survive. And in the end, it does this for our best interest, but in the end, the execution is not really for our best interest. So here's another more extensive list comparing the different parts of our lower self and our higher self. We don't need to go into detail about all of them, but I just want to show it to you so you get an idea of what the distinction is. And I'm also going to have this uploaded as a PDF so you can download it and have a proper look at it. So it just really shows that the ego is focused more on negative emotions such as fear and anger, and our higher self is really more about love and compassion. The ego mind is always distracted because this is the only place where the ego can survive, in a distracted mind, because the present moment is toxic for the ego. The ego cannot survive in the present moment. So it's all about me versus them. It's this separation versus the higher self being togetherness. Everything is united. It's yoga. It's union. And now what we're trying to do is to become aware of our negative self-talk, about these negative states within us. And then it's important to transforming these negative states, this negative self-talk, into positive ones. And as a next step, then we can remember our true essence, that we are only the I am, period. We are the I am. We are the pure being. Nothing needs to follow. We are. And so it's important that we do this not by force, because if we apply force against the ego, it's like fighting fire with fire. And so we use tools of the ego to fight the ego, but that will never work. We'll only strengthen it. So we need to encounter the ego with loving awareness. And we do this by present moment awareness. So being in the present moment and engaging with the ego in a loving way, so we pull it into the present moment and so it can dissolve by itself. It's no fight that needs to happen. And this is what we're going to try to do now in the next meditation. So enjoy.